Hey guys, welcome back to Mo's Game Table. Today we're going to take a look inside War in the Wind, the Battle for Attu Island, May 1943. This is a game designed by Mike Nagel and published by Compass Games. It's great to see Attu Island getting some attention here in the game because this is a long forgotten battle. Not a lot of attention is paid to it. It was a brutal battle and the conditions were terrible. So it's great to see this in game form. I'm curious to see how the designer has modeled all of this together. So I got a copy of it, and now I'm going to share a look inside with you. So let's take a look at the back of the box and see what this game's all about. In June 1942, forces of the Japanese Northern Army occupied Attu Island as part of its Midway campaign. Attu, at the far western end of the Aleutian archipelago, was American soil. In May 1943, American forces landed on Attu to liberate it. They were unprepared for the tenacity of the Japanese defenders and the brutality of the environmental conditions. What was expected to be a week-long cleanup exercise became a month-long, nose-to-nose meat grinder whose casualty levels would not be exceeded until Iwo Jima. War in the Wind is a low to moderate complexity game, roughly 8 pages of rules, depicting the brutal combat and conditions on Attu. The design focuses on the challenges faced by the American forces in the form of extremely variable weather conditions and logistical hurdles posed by nearly insurmountable terrain. The Japanese must use these conditions to their advantage in order to survive the overwhelming American numbers. You see an example here of the map and the counters. It is rated as medium complexity. Playtime is from 1 to 10 hours. It is high solitaire suitability. You get 246 counters and a 34 by 22 inch map. So let's take a look inside and see what you get. All right, we get 3D10. A full color rulebook, player aids, counter sheets, and our map. So let's set up the map and take a closer look at the game. And here's a look at the map that comes with the game. Very unique, very constricting, very forbidding type of terrain here. Beautifully done by Compass. I'm really looking forward to checking this out and seeing how this terrain will affect combat. Because you can see here, it's going to really limit how you move, and it's also going to kind of almost funnel you into certain areas. So I'm really curious to see how this plays out. At the top, we've got the turn track and the air power track. At the bottom, we have the weather table, the movement cost table, the air power determination table, and the combat modifiers table, as well as the American loss recovery table, and then the American casualty track, the staging zones, the American losses, and the American reinforcements track, as well as the scatter table already on the map for you. And you can see the staging zones are listed out on the map. So like I said, looking forward to checking out the challenges this map has to offer in playing. Now we'll take a look at the player aid that comes with the game. At the top, we have a breakdown of the Japanese and US units in the game, as well as a breakdown of the counter itself and how to read it. Then we have the terrain effects chart, optional victory level table, air power table, and the combat DR modifiers table. On the back, we have the weather table with a breakdown of all the different weather effects, historic US setup and start, and the landing scatter chart. And we'll take a look at the counters that come with the game. On the left-hand side, we have the US units. On the right-hand side, we have the Japanese units. Along the bottom, we have the admin counters. And then we have another quarter sheet of admin counters that comes with the game as well. On the left-hand side, you see this number at the top left. This is the step size of the unit because you can only have 12 steps of units in a hex. That's stacking limit. On the left, you see the number there. That is the melee number. Middle is the ranged attack number, and the far right number is the movement number. So there is melee combat here. This is more of a tactical game with line of sight and things like that. So it's going to be real interesting, especially on this terrain like we were looking at the map before, how the combat flows in this game. Now we'll take a look at the rules. This is a 19-page full-color rulebook. On the inside of the front cover, we have the table of contents. Then we get into the introduction, and we start off with the counters, a breakdown of the counters like we saw on the player aids, fog of war, and then important notes here. Then the turn sequence itself starts on page 4, so we'll get right into the rules proper. And we have all breakdown of the entire turn sequence, and the stacking limits, which we've talked about already, movement and terrain, illustrated example of movement of terrain, and we have zones of control with illustrated examples here. Supply, illustrated example of supply, so a lot of good supporting illustrated examples for each aspect of the game. Then we get to combat, Range combat, spotting distance, line of sight, which we've talked about. Range combat example here. Calling in artillery, weather effects, soft ground, line of sight example here. Air power, melee combat, and there's the melee combat example. Melee resolution, defensive fire, offensive fire, retreat option, advance option, and then the combat DRMs, which has the table there, which we saw on the player aid, US losses, and the Japanese losses. Then we get to the refit and reinforcements, breaks down all the steps for refits and reinforcements. You have the landing scatter chart and a continuation of the refit steps. Then we get to the American loss recovery table, victory zones, the heroes of Attu, which gives a breakdown of the different heroes that were in the battle, setup and start, and then we get to the landing zones and then the solitaire considerations, because this is a game that will lend itself well to solitaire play for the US player. Not as much for the Japanese player, but it gives you some considerations here when you're playing solitaire. Then you have the optional victory point chit system, a short scenario here if you want to get a quick game in. Then you have your credits, your reference, and then on the back of the rulebook, we have the sequence of play as well as things to remember when playing. And that is a look at everything you get inside of War in the Wind, the Battle for Attu Island, May 1943. This is a game designed by Mike Nagel and published by Compass Games. Attu Island is a battle that's not really covered in a lot of games. Lock and Load Tactical has a module on it, and this is the only other one that I'm aware of. If anybody else is aware of others, please post them down below. But I'm really curious to check this out because, as I said, it's a little covered game, a little covered battle. It's a piece of history I don't really know a lot about myself, and that's one of the great things about games is you get to experience those aspects of history that you want to learn about. The terrain looks really, really tight, really tough to get through, and really challenging to fight over. And you've got to worry about line of sight, you got to worry about melee combat, range combat. So like I said, this is going to be a challenging game to play, mostly for the US because you're going to be the one assaulting. The Japanese player is going to be very static, so it's not going to be as exciting for them, but it will make for a great solitaire game. And this is almost out of print, so if you want to copy this game, definitely get a copy of it now. That's why I got myself a copy, because it's going out of print and it's very low stock right now. But I'm looking forward to getting this one on the table and checking it out. Well, I hope that helps you guys out if you'd be curious about this one. If you have any comments or questions, post them down below. Thanks for tuning in, guys. See you next time.